On a cold Sunday morning in November 1970, a father and his two young daughters were hiking through a valley outside Bergen, Norway. The locals had a nickname for this place, Isdalen, the Ice Valley. Some called it something darker, Death Valley, because for centuries people who wanted to disappear came here. The girls smelled it before they saw it, a strange, sharp, burning smell drifting between the pine trees. They followed it off the trail, and among the broken rocks one of them found a hand, blackened, curled, reaching out from something that used to be a person. The body was burned almost beyond recognition. No face left to identify. No fingerprints that would ever come back clean. Just a woman, alone, in a valley nobody walks through by accident. The official report would eventually call it a suicide. Almost nobody who has ever looked closely at this case has believed that. This is the story of the Isdal woman, a woman who lived under at least 9 different names, who vanished so completely that even now, more than 50 years later, nobody can tell you who she actually was. And the deeper investigators dug, the stranger it got. Let's start at the scene itself because almost nothing about it made sense. Her body had been burned with such intensity that police initially assumed gasoline had been used. But the burn pattern was strange, concentrated, localized in a way an ordinary fire doesn't behave. Scattered around her were the remnants of a passport, completely unreadable, an umbrella, a pair of rubber boots, some bottles, possibly for fuel, and several pieces of jewelry, oddly untouched by the flames that had destroyed almost everything else. There were sleeping pills nearby too, partially dissolved. The medical examiner would later conclude she died from a combination of carbon monoxide poisoning and a barbiturate overdose, 2 separate, severe methods of dying at the same time. That detail alone should have ended the suicide theory before it began. Police traced her movements backward, and what they found didn't read like the final days of someone planning to end their life. It read like the final days of someone running from something. Roughly a week before her body was found, staff at a hotel called Hordeheimer in Bergen reported seeing a woman matching her description. Well-dressed, calm, dark-haired, speaking with a foreign accent nobody could quite place. One witness, the son of a local shoe store owner, remembered her clearly. She'd come in to buy a pair of boots, the exact same style of boots later found at the scene of her death. He remembered she smelled faintly of garlic, a strange detail to lodge in someone's memory, until you learn why investigators think it mattered later. Another hotel reported she'd checked in under the name Fenella Lork, claiming to be a traveling saleswoman and antiques dealer from Belgium. That was just one of her names. When police finally tracked down her luggage, stored at the Bergen train station, what they found turned this from a tragic death into one of the strangest unsolved cases in modern European history. Inside 2 suitcases, they found multiple wigs, foreign currency from several different countries, a pair of glasses with the lenses removed, makeup, and most chillingly, a notepad filled with a code. Rows of numbers and letters that meant nothing to anyone who looked at them. Every single label had been removed from her clothing, every laundry tag, every manufacturer's mark. Someone had gone through this woman's belongings piece by piece and deliberately erased every thread that could lead back to her identity. That isn't something a person does by accident. And it wasn't just one alias. Investigators dug through hotel registries across Norway, Belgium, and Germany and found that this same woman had checked into hotels under at least 8 or 9 different names, in multiple countries, often within the same few months. Genevieve Lancier, Claudia Tielt, Claudia Nielsen, Alexia Zarna Merches, Vera Jarl, Elizabeth Lienhauer, always a slightly different name. Always a slightly different story about who she was. Whoever this woman was, she had built an entire architecture of false identities, and she had been living inside it for a very long time. So, who builds a life like that? 3 theories emerged, and more than 50 years later, none of them have ever been ruled out. The first theory is the one most people land on immediately. She was a spy. Bergen in 1970 sat near sensitive military installations during the height of the Cold War, at a moment when NATO and Soviet intelligence services were both extremely active across Scandinavia. A classified Norwegian military document, declassified years later, noted that a senior commander remarked her movements lined up suspiciously well with the timeline of secret missile testing happening in the region. The fake identities, the removed labels, the coded notepad. If you set out to design a profile for a Cold War operative, You'd struggle to make it more textbook than this. The second theory is darker and more personal. Maybe she wasn't working for a government. Maybe she was running from something far more dangerous. Researchers have pointed to her belongings and her patterns of travel, and suggested she may have been entangled in something closer to organized crime, moving through Cold War Europe. Under this theory, the disguises weren't espionage tradecraft. They were survival. A woman trying to stay one step ahead of people who wanted to find her. And in November 1970, in a remote valley outside Bergen, they finally did. The third theory is the quietest one, and in some ways the saddest. Maybe this was a woman dealing with profound psychological distress, constructing elaborate identities as a way of coping with something we'll never fully understand. And maybe, in the end, she really did take her own life, just not in any way that made immediate sense to the people who found her. None of these three theories cleanly explain everything. The spy theory doesn't fully explain the overdose and the fire happening together. The crime theory doesn't explain why she was never tied to any known criminal network. And the psychological distress theory doesn't explain why someone in crisis would spend months building 9 separate identities across 4 countries. For decades, the case went cold. Police distributed her fingerprints through Interpol. Nothing came back. They circulated sketches. Nobody recognized her. The file aged into a strange kind of regional folklore. Locals in Bergen knew the story. Most of the world had never heard of her. Then, in 2016, journalists from Norway's national broadcaster decided to dig the case back up, 46 years after her death. What they discovered changed everything we thought we knew, while somehow making the mystery even deeper. It turned out that tissue samples from her original autopsy had been quietly preserved at a hospital in Bergen for nearly half a century. Nobody had thought to test them properly, because in 1970, the science to do so simply didn't exist yet. Now it did. Scientists ran a stable isotope analysis on her teeth, a technique that can reveal where a person grew up based on trace chemical signatures absorbed from local water and food during childhood. The results placed her origin somewhere along the French-German border, likely near Nuremberg, in southeastern Germany. Her dental work told its own story, too. Investigators found evidence of dental treatments performed in East Asia, Central Europe, Southern Europe, and possibly South America. This was not a woman who stayed in one place. This was a woman who had spent years, maybe decades, crisscrossing the globe. Her DNA was finally fully sequenced. It confirmed she was very likely of European descent, which quietly ruled out one popular theory, that she'd been an agent for a Middle Eastern intelligence service. In 2018, Bergen police released a new facial reconstruction built directly from her skull structure. Sharp features, dark, intense eyes. They published it everywhere. Newspapers, television, online appeals across multiple countries. Someone, somewhere, had to recognize her. Nobody ever did. Investigators received over 150 tips after the documentary aired. Every single one led nowhere. And that might be the most unsettling part of this entire story. This was a woman with a fully constructed network of false identities operating across an entire continent. Somebody trained her, or helped her, or at the absolute minimum, knew exactly who she really was, and whoever that person was. They have stayed silent for more than 50 years. Maybe they're no longer alive. Maybe they made a promise. Or maybe, somewhere out there, someone is still keeping a secret that's now older than most of the people investigating it. Today, the Isdal woman is buried in Mullendal Cemetery in Bergen, beneath a grave marker that still, to this day, says nothing more than unknown woman. For a brief stretch of years in the early 1970s, local police actually visited her grave, quietly, on the anniversary of her death. As if hoping that this might be the year someone finally came forward. She was somebody's daughter, possibly somebody's mother. She had a real name, spoken by real people, in a language we still don't know for certain. And somewhere, that name is sitting in someone's memory, or in some forgotten record, waiting. Until then, she remains exactly what the rocks and the ash left behind in 1970. A woman with 9 names. And not one of them was ever real.